So my name is Lyev Pitram, and I am a high school senior from Philadelphia. And my presentation today is about looking at the opener in baseball and its effectiveness. So for those of you that don't know, the opener is a strategy where essentially if a team has a really good reliever and not as good of a starting pitcher, you can use the reliever in the first inning instead of in the later innings, and then the traditional starting pitcher would come afterwards. This reliever is considered an opener, and this strategy was first introduced widely by the Tampa Bay Rays in 2018. So the benefits of the strategy is that you'll get a top-notch pitcher guaranteed to face the top of the opponent's order, since they always appear in the first inning. And meanwhile, the traditional starting pitcher would likely see the top of the order less often, and it's helpful when the pitcher doesn't go as many innings, because then you avoid the third time through the order. The first inning will matter in every single game. It's always going to be 0-0 at the beginning of the game, whereas in the ninth inning, eighth inning, not necessarily. And hitters will get weirder looks. They're not necessarily used to facing different pitchers early in a game. But then there are a few detriments as well, where one reliever, sometimes a very effective reliever, is not available at the end of the game, and the pitcher routines get altered, and the bulk pitchers that would traditionally prefer to be starting pitchers may feel less valuable. So just notes from previous research, I didn't find anything really looking in like a simulation-based approach the way that I took it. But when the media looked at the opener after the Rays used it a lot in 2018, it just turned out, obviously it receives a lot more attention when it's a well-known reliever like Sergio Romo that opens. Opener games are naturally going to perform a lot worse. And this is because the reason you use an opener is because your starting pitcher isn't as good. And that means that it's hard to compare games where there was an opener versus games where there wasn't an opener, because those games just have various factors that affect the results. And then as for what happens to the pitchers themselves, it was surprisingly, the bulk pitcher didn't improve as much as expected, and the relievers actually tended to perform better as openers, which was interesting. But the methodology for my own research, the goal was to simulate games and to pick specific games and from the 2023 MLB season and to simulate them in pairs. So have a regular game that just had the original box score of pitchers from the game, and then pick a specific reliever, move him to be the opener of that game, and then simulate what the game would have looked like if that were the pitching lineup, and then keeping all other factors like lineups and defenses equal. And in order to simulate these games, we need to simulate individual plate appearances. And there are 7 possible outcomes. There's the 3 true outcomes, so walk, strikeout, or home run, as well as a ball and play out, a single, a double, or a triple. And we wanted to be able to model the probabilities of these. And then to do so, just taking the quality metric of players and then using that as an input into a simulation function. So this was the equation used to quantify the quality of both batters and pitchers. So this is essentially a padded mean of WOBA. The left side here, so the WOBA over N, that's just the sum of all of the WOBAs from plate appearances or total batters faced, divided by the amount of plate appearances. So just the definition of what an average is. And then on the right side, this N0 is 100 fake plate appearances. And how that works is if you imagine a player with only 50 plate appearances or total batters faced in a season, this 100 makes a big difference and really affects that average. Whereas if you had 700 plate appearances, 700 batters faced, the extra 100 won't alter this outcome as much. And what this does is it brings this average a certain amount closer to the constant A. And that's a player-based WOBA constant that is for experienced players, so players that surpass a certain plate appearance threshold in the last 3-4 seasons. Those players will just have their rating brought closer to their past WOBA. whereas rookies or players that didn't achieve a certain threshold in past seasons, their WOBA will be brought closer to a below average WOBA from Fangraphs, since you assume that these players are likely below average. But now using these ratings to simulate plate appearances, I used two multinomial logistic regressions, and they all inputted the 36 different combinations of bins. So going back to this player quality, we classed all these players into bins of 6 bins from elite to very poor for both pitchers and hitters. And these 36 different combinations of different bins that can face each other, these all give an output of the probability of each outcome. And there are two multinomial logistic regressions. So one that gave the original 3 true outcomes. So either it's a strikeout, a walk, a home run, or it's a ball in play. And then if it's a ball in play, then the second regression is activated, which would then say if it's an out, a single, double, or a triple. And then this chart here, this shading is from the first regression. So just in expected WOBA between all the different combinations. So the columns here are batter quality, and then the rows are pitcher quality. And it looks pretty linear in general. So obviously, as the batters improve, the batting outcome will improve. And as the pitchers improve, the pitching outcome will improve. But what was interesting here is in this bottom row of elite pitchers, whereas everything else seems pretty linear, these 4 colors right here looked pretty uniform. And what that showed was that these elite pitchers tend to be elite against basically everyone, whereas the good and the great pitchers and the rest of the pitchers, they tend to correlate more with the quality of the batter that they're facing. And this is just the same graph spread into bar graphs. So each box here is a different class of pitcher. And that top left one, that's the elite pitchers. And as you can see, the middle 4 bars are pretty close together, whereas for every other box, it's more linear of a curve. So as a result, the main focus here was on elite relievers. So anyone that had a pitcher quality of 275 or lower in the 2023 season. And I'll argue this list as you may, but this was the 10 people that ended up getting this marked as elite relievers. Now note that Liam Hendricks and Adam Kolarek, they both had low sample sizes and kind of cheated the system where in past seasons they were good. And so I just ended up not picking them for any of the games that I chose to simulate. But these 10 relievers, the goal is to find games where I believe they can have an impact if they were used as an opener. And once we select those games, we want to run simulations of these games with 2 different versions. And you can use this example where I chose Chris Martin, and this was a Red Sox game from 2023. I chose Chris Martin as the opener, and in the regular game, you just use the original box score. And when I simulate this game, no matter what, I want Brian Bayo pitching 6 innings, and then Winkowski goes an inning after that, and Martin goes an inning. And no matter what happens, batters faced, pitches thrown, runs allowed, whatever, it stays like this. And then if we modify it, Chris Martin now pitches the first inning and the order stays the same after him, then the goal is to look at the differences between these 2 simulations. And to simulate individual games, pretty simple. We simulate each plate appearance, and every time it would change the game state. And the game state looks something like this with inning, outs, runners on base, score, as well as what lineup number it is. And also a quick note that we didn't use any offensive substitutions because you can't guarantee that the same substitutions will be made if the pitching order is different or if the game outcome is different. So just for simplicity's sake. So to sum it up, I selected 10 games where I expected the opener to have an effect. 10 games, various different pitchers that we would use as the openers, all on that list of elite relievers. And then also 6 control games that still used these same elite pitchers, but where I expected something to kind of cancel out that eliteness. So for example, the elite pitchers, they kind of go back to that linear trend when they face elite batters. So I assume that maybe if they face elite batters, they wouldn't work as openers because the whole idea of the eliteness would get canceled out. Or if there was an elite starting pitcher already, it shouldn't make a difference that there is an elite pitcher or an elite reliever instead of the elite starting pitcher, since the model would treat them as the same person. Then I used runs allowed as to quantify the outcome. And I mass simulated both the modified and regular games 60,000 times each for each of these examples to kind of get the desired accuracy of my results. And I created 95% confidence intervals for both sides. And then if the intervals overlapped or the interval for the entire modified game was higher, then that meant the opener either didn't have an effect or had a negative effect. Whereas if the entire confidence interval for the modified game was lower, then that means that the hypothesis was right and the modified game was definitely effective. So the results of the 10 games where I expected the opener to be significant, surprisingly, only 5 out of 10 actually had that positive effect. These are the 5 games. You can see the game date, the team that utilized the opener. There's a lot of Evan Phillips on this. That's just how the examples ended up going. And as you can see, also the confidence intervals for the modified is clearly lower in every single example. And then the 5 where there was no significant effect, where these 5, once again, as you can see, here the confidence intervals overlap. But what's interesting about these is I looked into a lot of different factors, like which inning the opener originally pitched him in the original box score, because sometimes it's a closer and sometimes it's not. How many innings the relief pitcher went, and various things like that. But there was really no correlation between kind of what made these work or what made these not work and what made these ones work, except for the fact that Evan Phillips is on this list 3 times and Chris Martin is on this list 3 times. So one potential thought that I had was maybe it's something related to the team, since it can't be the player because these players are treated the same exact way. Elite doesn't matter if your name's Chris Martin or Evan Phillips. An elite pitcher is an elite pitcher. So moving on to the games where we expected the opener to be insignificant, surprisingly, 5 out of 6 actually were significant. So here the hypothesis was pretty wrong. And kind of, once again, it was hard to tell what made the difference here, but this is actually interesting that says maybe the opener was more effective than we thought. So maybe, as you can see, every time we had an elite hitter or a lineup with elite hitters, which is marked by those blue games, every time it didn't matter. It was still better to have the opener. And quite surprisingly, these 2 games with Dustin May and Brandon Woodruff that were both considered elite pitchers in 2023, surprisingly, these games, it actually worked even to move this 9th inning reliever to the 1st inning. And it basically means that it's better to have your first 7 innings of elite pitcher than the first 6 and then the 9th one after that, which really kind of just played off the title that I had for this, which was using the elite pitchers earlier in the game. But the big takeaway, so this number isn't huge. It's 0.07 runs that were prevented by switching to an elite reliever. But what matters is that this number is positive, and this number with 95% confidence is proven that, hey, the opener works. And now kind of the question is, what differentiates the cases where it did work from the cases where it didn't? And that kind of just leads to the further research, further questions that I have. Was it the pitching staff, the pitchers around the elite pitcher that made a difference somehow? Was it the inning amount between the starting pitcher or the relief pitcher? And then also my simulation system, I'm a high schooler, so I didn't have the best resources. There's a lot of simplifications that I made. Removing those can probably add some more interesting layers to this, as well as looking into different uses of the opener, such as if you have a bullpen game and every reliever is going to pitch at some point during the game, who's going to pitch the 1st inning, who's going to be guaranteed to face these top batters, or how the opposing manager should react lineup decision-wise when they know that the other team is using an opener. But yeah, that is my presentation. So thank you.